The Badlands don't bury things. They just wait. Somewhere out there, a woman called her father, said she found something in the survey data. That was the last anyone heard her voice. Her name was Claire Hurst. No, wait. Her name was Claire Voss. Hurst is someone else entirely. In South Dakota, land is everything, and everything has a price. Detective Lena Cross has worked missing persons for 11 years. She's never stopped finding them. Until now, she hadn't. Day 9. Claire Voss, 28 years old. Federal cartography contractor. Last seen at grid reference 44.7 north, 102.1 west. A section of Badlands terrain so remote, the GPS signal breaks up just describing it. Her survey team reported her missing at 1800 hours. They waited 4 hours before calling it in. 4 hours. Lena had read that detail 6 times. It still didn't sit right. The BLM liaison called again, Noel said. He didn't say good morning. He never did when he had an agenda. They want to reclassify it as a hiking incident. Solo deviation from the survey route. Exposure risk. Lena turned the page in the folder. She had a satellite communicator. Full battery. Never triggered. Noel pulled up the weather report on his screen. Wind out there hits 60 miles an hour. Equipment fails. Equipment fails. Lena repeated, quietly. She didn't say what she thought of that. Not yet. The survey team's base camp was 6 miles northeast. Claire's last logged position put her here, at the edge of a section marked as federal land on every current map. Every current map. Lena pulled out her own copy. Older, pre-2019, before the last Bureau of Land Management review. On this one, the section was marked differently. Private acquisition pending. The applicant's name had been redacted, but the application number was still visible. She photographed it, stood, looked at the 2 sets of prints. Somebody walked out here with Claire Voss, and only one of them walked back. Dale Hurst had not watched the news in 9 days. He didn't need to. He knew what was out there. He knew what wasn't. He knew the terrain the way most men know their own hallway. In the dark, without thinking, without error. The survey contract had been awarded 3 weeks ago. He had expected complications. Claire Voss hadn't been a complication. She had been a discovery, and discoveries, in Dale Hurst's experience, had a way of getting corrected. He folded the map, slowly, along the original creases, stood, put on his gloves, walked to the window. The Badlands were out there, past the edge of town, past the sightline of anyone who might think to look. He pressed one gloved finger to the glass. Left no print. That was the point. Application number 2017 BLMSD 0041. It took her 40 minutes to trace it. The redaction on the old map wasn't a clerical decision. It was a legal one, filed under a subsidiary company, dissolved in 2020, re-registered under a different name in 2021. Both addresses led to the same building. One name appeared on every document, not as the principal, never as the principal, always as the authorized representative, Dale Hurst. Lena set the paper down, picked up her cold coffee, didn't drink it. From the hallway, no sound. Her daughter's door hadn't opened in 3 days. Not because she was gone, because Lena kept arriving home after midnight and leaving again before 7. She put the mug down, looked at the closed door, looked back at the paper, picked up a red pen, circled the name. Robert Voss picked up on the first ring. He'd been awake, of course he had, 9 days. And a father who mapped terrain for a living had not slept once through the night. She called me at 6:14, he said. Same words, same sequence. Lena had heard them 4 times now. She said she found something in the survey data. A discrepancy. A boundary marker that didn't match the federal registry. She said, he stopped, Mr. Voss. She said someone had moved it, physically, the marker post. It had been relocated by at least 40 feet. Lena sat forward slowly. 40 feet. In federal land surveying, 40 feet is not a rounding error. 40 feet is intent. A relocated boundary marker. Lena pulled up the federal parcel registry on her screen. The section in question, Grid 44.7, subsection 9C, had been quietly reclassified in 2019. Not sold, not auctioned, reclassified. From protected federal wilderness to commercially viable subsurface mineral survey zone. The authorization had gone through a regional BLM administrative review. Routine. Rubber stamped. No public notice. No environmental assessment. 3 signatures on the approval document. One of them she recognized immediately. The second she'd need to look up. The third was a notary stamp from a law office in Rapid City. Sandra Yee, attorney at law. The BLM field office smelled like recycled air and old decisions. The clerk, mid-40s, government lanyard, eyes that moved to the phone twice before he answered a single question, told them the 2019 reclassification was standard procedure. Who initiated the review? Lena asked. That would be in the administrative record. I know. I'm asking you. A pause. The kind that has a name behind it. Regional Director Albrecht signed off on it. He's retired now. Florida, I think. Noel wrote something down. Lena didn't look at what. And the original boundary survey, the one that preceded the reclassification. Who conducted it? The clerk's eyes moved to the phone again. This time, Lena put 2 fingers gently on top of it. He told her. The 2017 boundary survey had been conducted by Hearst Land Development, LLC, contracted by the BLM Regional Office, paid from federal funds. To survey the land that Hearst himself had a pending private acquisition application on. Noel stood very still. Lena came to stand beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. That's a conflict of interest, Noel said finally. That's generous, Lena said. He'd heard about the detective by noon. Small county, 1 sheriff's station. A woman asking questions at the BLM office travels fast in a place like this. Dale set the pen down, aligned it with the ledger's spine. Sandra, he said into the phone. Not a greeting, an instruction. On the other end, a pause. The kind a careful attorney allows herself before agreeing to something she already decided 3 days ago. I'll handle the inquiry, she said. You'll handle the detective, Dale said. The inquiry is already handled. He closed the ledger, put his gloved hand flat on the cover. Outside, past the edge of town, the Badlands sat exactly where they had always sat. Patient, indifferent, holding everything he'd ever given them. From up here, the geometry was visible. The reclassified section formed a clean rectangle. Too clean for natural terrain. Someone had drawn that line on purpose. Someone who knew exactly what was below that ground. Subsurface mineral survey zone. Lena pulled out her phone. No signal. She'd known there wouldn't be. Claire Voss had known too. That's why she'd used the satellite communicator. The one with a full battery that she never triggered, unless she did trigger it. And someone had the receiver. Lena looked at the orange survey flag. It was the last one Claire had planted. The field notes put her here at 5:47 p.m. By 6:14, she was calling her father. By 6:14 plus something, she was gone. 27 minutes. Something had happened in 27 minutes. At the edge of a boundary line that shouldn't exist, Lena photographed the flag, the terrain, the geometry below, started walking back. The wind behind her felt like a hand. 40 feet. She'd measured it to 40 feet. Dale had underestimated Claire Voss. He would not make a record of that mistake, but he would not forget it either. The man who taught him this business, his father's partner, long dead, no name worth keeping, had told him once, the land doesn't lie. People read it wrong. That's not the land's fault. Dale had moved the marker because the survey would have flagged the discrepancy. The discrepancy would have triggered a review. The review would have found the acquisition application. The application would have revealed the contract. The contract would have ended everything. Claire Voss had found it anyway. In 27 minutes, he pressed his forehead very lightly to the glass, closed his eyes. Outside, the Badlands waited. They always did. Robert Voss lived 40 minutes outside of Rapid City, the kind of distance that used to mean something. Privacy, land, quiet. Now it just meant no one had driven by to notice the curtains hadn't moved in 9 days. Lena had called ahead. He'd said, come whenever. The voice of a man for whom time had stopped organizing itself into before and after. She stood at the gravel for a moment, looked at the truck. The dust on the hood was undisturbed. He hadn't left the property. She walked to the porch, knocked twice. The door opened before her hand dropped. He'd been building his own case. Lena saw it immediately. The kind of organized grief that looks like work, because work is the only thing that doesn't require you to feel it. Every survey route, every GPS log she'd emailed home, every photo from the field, pinned, sequenced, annotated. She sent me the data, Robert said. Not as an opening, as a correction. as if Lena had already suggested she hadn't. The survey discrepancy. She emailed it the morning she disappeared, flagged it for internal review at the BLM regional office. Lena looked up from her notebook. Did she receive a response? Robert unfolded his arms, walked to the table, picked up a single printed email, handed it to her without a word. The email had been sent at 4:52 p.m., 1 hour and 22 minutes before Claire called her father from the field. It was a reply, automated in format, personal in language. 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph thanked her for her diligence and professionalism. The second paragraph told her the discrepancy had already been flagged, reviewed, and resolved by the regional administrative office, and that no further action was required on her part. It was signed by the BLM regional coordinator, but the email address it came from was not a federal government domain. Lena read the address twice. A private server, a civilian domain. Someone outside the BLM had sent Claire Voss a reply on behalf of the BLM regional coordinator, telling her to stop looking 90 minutes before she disappeared. She didn't stop, Robert said. His voice had dropped to something very quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't calm. It's what's left after anger burns through itself and leaves the structure standing. She called me because she knew something was wrong. Not because she was scared. Claire didn't. He stopped, started again. She called me because she wanted someone to know where she was, what she'd found. In case. He turned, looked at Lena directly for the first time since she'd sat down. In case what? Lena asked, even though she already knew. In case she was right, he said, and someone didn't want her to be. Sandra Yee had called her. That was the first thing, Lena noted. Not Dale Hurst. Not through a liaison. Sandra herself. Direct line. Professional tone. Suggesting they speak informally before things became formal. Lena had agreed. Informal conversations had a way of becoming the most useful ones. Sandra didn't open with pleasantries. She opened with a question. How far along is your investigation, Detective Cross? Lena poured herself coffee from the table carafe. Took her time. Far enough, she said. Mr. Hurst is a private citizen, Sandra said, with a legitimate business history in this region spanning 31 years. Any suggestion of criminal involvement in a missing persons case without evidence would constitute a significant liability. For who? Lena asked. Sandra didn't answer that. The reclassification of the land parcel was processed through legal administrative channels. I notarized the documentation. That is the extent of my involvement. And the email sent from a private server impersonating a federal coordinator? A pause. 1 second. Maybe 2. Sandra picked up her glasses, put them back on, slowly. I'm not aware of any such email, she said. Her voice was exactly the same. That was the problem. It was exactly the same. Lena let the silence run. Sandra Yee was very good at silence. Most attorneys were, but there was a difference between comfortable silence and occupied silence. Sandra's was occupied. Something behind the glasses was working, recalculating, not panicking, recalculating. The way a person does when a variable they thought was controlled has turned out to be in motion. You drove 40 minutes to tell me you're not aware of it, Lena said finally. Sandra stood, picked up the briefcase, buttoned her jacket with 2 precise movements. I drove 40 minutes, she said, to make sure you understand the difference between a line of inquiry and a line you can't uncross. She left 2 20s on the table. For a coffee neither of them had touched. Lena watched her walk to the door, watched the door close, picked up her own coffee, finally drank it. Cold. Sandra had called him from the parking lot. 3 sentences. That was all it took between people who had known each other long enough to compress everything into grammar. She has the email. She's further than we thought. We need the timeline to hold. Dale had listened, said nothing, hung up. The timeline. He'd constructed it carefully. Claire's departure logged as voluntary deviation, her satellite communicator as a malfunction, her survey flag as the last known point before a solo decision went wrong in difficult terrain. Every piece had held for 9 days. But timelines, Dale knew, were only as strong as the people who hadn't been asked about them yet. He thought about Robert Voss, the father, the cartographer, the man who measured things for a living and couldn't stop. He hadn't been managed. That was an error. Dale put on his coat, picked up his keys. He did not pick up his phone. Day 10. The timeline had 3 holes in it. First hole. Who sent the email from the private server? Second hole. What happened in the 27 minutes between Claire's last GPS log and her father's phone call? Third hole. Where the satellite communicator was now. Lena had requested the device's signal history from the manufacturer's registry. The federal coordinator had blocked the request. Standard procedure, she was told. Active missing persons investigation. Jurisdictional protocol. The coordinator whose email address had been impersonated. Lena added a fourth line to the timeline. Not a hole. A pressure point. She wrote one word. Garrett. The survey team had been stood down on day 4. BLM regional decision. Pending review of the missing contractor situation. Which meant pending the outcome of a calculation someone higher up was still running. One team member had stayed. Garrett Chu, 24 years old, junior survey technician, 8 months on the job. He'd refused the stand-down order on the grounds that someone needed to maintain the equipment inventory. It was a thin reason. Lena suspected it was a guilty conscience wearing a procedural mask. Garrett hadn't slept properly since day 1. It was visible in the architecture of his face, the specific collapse around the eyes that isn't just tiredness. It's the weight of something unspoken pressing from the inside. Tell me about the afternoon she disappeared, Lena said. No preamble. Garrett wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. We split into 2 teams at 1400. Standard procedure for that grid section. Claire took the eastern boundary markers. Grid, 9C and 9D. I took the western run. Alone. A pause that lasted 1 second too long. Alone, he said. Before she left for the eastern boundary, Lena said carefully. Did she tell you what she'd found in the survey data? Garrett's jaw moved before his words did. She mentioned a discrepancy. Boundary marker off by some distance. I told her it was probably a recalibration error. Equipment drift in the heat. Did you believe that? He looked at the mug. I wanted to. Lena let that sit. Garrett, did someone contact you before the stand-down order? Before the BLM called it in? His knuckle went white on the mug handle. There was a man, he said, very quietly. At the camp. The evening of day 1. He wasn't federal. He wasn't survey. He said he was a regional land consultant. He asked what Claire had been measuring in grid 9C. Did he give you a name? Garrett looked up. He didn't have to. He had a business card. I threw it away. Lena picked up her pen. What did it say? Garrett told her. This is what Claire Voss did in those 27 minutes. She measured. The marker post sat 41 feet, 3 inches from its registered coordinate. Not drift. Not equipment error. The post had been driven into different ground. New earth. The clay disturbed and repacked around its base. Someone had pulled it and replanted it. She photographed it from 6 angles. Logged the GPS coordinates manually as a backup to the device record. Emailed her findings to the BLM office and to her father. Then she stood, looked at the terrain around her. The realization came the way most realizations do. Not as a single thought, but as a landscape suddenly rearranging itself into a shape that had always been there. The boundary wasn't moved to correct an error. It was moved to contain something. Something below the ground. Something worth containing. She picked up her satellite communicator. There was a vehicle parked on the access road above the ridge. A dark SUV. No markings. It had not been there an hour ago. Claire did not trigger the communicator. If whoever was in that vehicle was monitoring the satellite frequency, and she had reason now to believe someone had been monitoring everything, triggering it would tell them exactly where she was. She lowered the device, put it in her vest pocket, pulled out her phone instead. No signal. She knew there wouldn't be. She started walking, not toward the camp, away from the ridge, into the formations. She would circle back, find a signal point, call her father, tell him where she was, what she'd found, in case. That was the last decision Claire Voss made in this terrain that we can reconstruct with certainty. Everything after the vehicle is still a 27-minute silence. He had seen her move. From up here, in the right light, at the right hour, the Badlands gave up their geometry. The shadows told you where the hollows were. The dust told you where something had disturbed the surface. He had watched her crouch at the marker, watched her photograph it, watched her raise the communicator, and then, inexplicably, improbably, watched her lower it. She was smart. Smarter than the email should have allowed. Smarter than the stand-down order assumed. He watched her move into the formations, put his hand back on the car roof, pressed down slowly. He had not come here to do anything. He had come to see whether anything needed to be done. Now he knew. He got back in the vehicle, sat for a long moment. The terrain below offered nothing back. It never did. That was why he trusted it. Dale Hurst had been at this camp on day one. Not the BLM. Not search and rescue. Dale Hurst, in a dark SUV with no markings, with a business card and a question about what Claire had been measuring, before anyone had formally declared her missing, before the timeline had been constructed, before the stand-down order had been issued. He had arrived here already knowing she was gone, which meant one of two things. Either he had been monitoring the terrain and witnessed her disappearance, or he had done more than witness it. Lena looked at the eastern formations. The sun was going down behind her, pushing the shadows of the spires long and dark across the flat ground below, like fingers reaching towards something they couldn't quite cover. She took out her phone, called Noel. Get Garrett's statement in writing, every word, sign and date it. You heading back? She looked at the formations a moment longer. Not yet, she said. There's an access road above the eastern ridge. I want to know who owns it. She already suspected. She needed it confirmed. The access road above the eastern ridge appeared on two documents. On the county road registry, it was listed as an unmaintained fire access route. Public land, no private designation, last surveyed in 1987. On the BLM parcel overlay, the one from 2019, post-reclassification, it had been quietly absorbed into the boundary of the commercially designated zone, which meant it was no longer a public road, which meant Dale Hurst had been parked on land he controlled, watching a federal contractor document evidence of his fraud from a position of complete legal cover. Lena sat back. He hadn't just planned the boundary manipulation, he had planned the observation point. This was not a man who reacted. This was a man who arranged. The access road transfer had been filed on a Tuesday in March 2019, the same week as the reclassification, the same notary stamp, Sandra Yee. The clerk, May Sutton, 60 years in this county, the kind of institutional memory that outlasts every administration, set a second ledger on the counter without being asked. You'll want the 2017 volume as well, she said. Lena looked up. May's expression was professionally neutral, but her hands had moved the ledger with the specific intention of someone who has been waiting for someone to come in and ask the right questions for a very long time. The same applicant filed an earlier transfer in 2017, May said. It was rejected on a technicality, refiled in 2019 with the correction. What was the technicality? Noel asked. May opened the 2017 volume to a tabbed page. A competing claim, she said, filed the same week by the original owner of that parcel. She turned the ledger toward Lena. The competing claim had been filed by a cartography and land survey firm, owner of record, Robert Voss. Robert Voss had filed a competing land claim on the same parcel in the same week as Dale Hurst's first application. Claire's father, the cartographer, the man who measured things for a living. He had known about the parcel in 2017, known about Hurst's application, filed against it, and lost, or rather, been outmaneuvered, when Hurst refiled 2 years later through channels Robert's small firm couldn't afford to contest. Lena thought about the corkboard in Robert Voss's living room. The organized grief, the maps, the timeline, the printed emails. She thought about the way he'd said, "She called me because she wanted someone to know where she was." She thought about Claire, 28 years old, sent to survey land her father had once tried to claim. Assignment of coincidence required a certain suspension of logic that Lena Cross had never been able to manage. She put her glasses back on. "Pull everything you have on Robert Voss," she said to Noel very quietly. He looked at her, then at the ledger, then back at her. "You think he knew she'd find it?" Noel said. Lena didn't answer. That was its own kind of answer. Warren Hale, BLM Regional Coordinator, answered on the fourth ring. He had a careful voice, the kind of careful that is practiced, not natural, practiced. Lena asked him about the private server email, the one sent to Claire Voss 90 minutes before she disappeared, using his name and his title from a domain that was not his. A pause. I'm not aware of any communication sent on my behalf from an external domain. Are you aware of who has access to your official correspondence templates? Another pause. Longer. Detective Cross, I want to be helpful here. Then be helpful. But any discussion of internal BLM, communications infrastructure would need to go through our legal office. A woman is missing, Mr. Hale. I understand that. Someone used your identity to tell her to stop looking 90 minutes before she vanished. I'm asking you who had access. The third pause was the longest. I'll need to make a call, he said, before I can speak to that. He hung up. Lena set the phone down. He was going to make one call. She was certain she knew who he was calling. Hale had called within 4 minutes. Dale listened, said 3 words, hung up. Sandra was already looking at him when he set the receiver down. She has the email, Dale said. She has the road transfer. She has the 2017 competing claim. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Robert Voss, she said. Not a question. He gave her the email. Dale's voice was measured, even. The voice he used when the calculation had already been run, and the result was unpleasant, but not unmanageable. He brought his daughter here knowing what she'd find. Sandra turned to look out the window. You don't know that, she said. I know he filed against me in 2017. I know he lost. I know his daughter was assigned to survey my parcel 10 days ago. He let that sit. That is not coincidence, Sandra. That is a plan. A slow one. A patient one. He almost sounded, in that moment, like he respected it. The competing claim is public record, Sandra said. The detective will have it by now. She'll go back to Robert Voss. Yes. And when she does, his story changes shape. He's no longer just a grieving father. He becomes a party with prior interest in the outcome of the survey. Dale said nothing. That creates ambiguity, Sandra continued. Ambiguity is manageable, as long as the timeline holds. The timeline holds, Dale said. Garrett Chu gave a statement today. A beat. How complete? Complete enough that the access road will come up. Your presence at the camp on day 1 will come up. Dale stood slowly, straightened his jacket. Then we need the timeline to be the only version of events that has physical evidence behind it. Sandra looked at him for a long moment. Dale, the communicator, he said quietly. It needs to be found, in the right location, with the right malfunction logged. Sandra closed the briefcase clasp. The sound was very small in the room. I'm an attorney, she said, not an evidence technician. I know what you are, Dale said. I've known for 31 years. She picked up the briefcase, walked to the door, stopped, didn't turn around. The location needs to be at least 2 miles from the marker, she said. Then she left. Someone had already circled Grid 9C. Not her, not Noel. The pencil mark was old. The kind of old that comes from years of ambient light fading the graphite at the edges. This map had been on this wall for years. Someone in this office had marked this section years ago and never followed it up, or had been told not to. Lena photographed it, then stood back and looked at the full map wall. All of it, the complete geography, the years of accumulated documentation pinned and layered and overlapping. Somewhere in this building, someone had known what Dale Hurst was doing to that parcel and had decided the knowing was enough. She thought about Warren Hale's voice, the practiced careful. She thought about the pencil circle, the faded edges. She thought about Claire Voss crouching in the clay 41 feet from where a boundary marker should have been, finding in 27 minutes what this office had been looking at for years. Lena took off her reading glasses, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. Outside, the Badlands were where they always were, waiting, holding. She put her glasses back on, took out her phone, called Robert Voss. It rang 6 times. No answer. The door had been open for some time. She could tell from the way the cold had gotten inside, the specific temperature of a house that had stopped being defended. Lena cleared the porch in 3 steps. Hand on her weapon, not drawn, not yet. Mr. Voss. Nothing. She stepped inside. The standing lamp was still on. The corkboard was still covered. The maps were still spread across the folding table. Everything exactly as she had left it 2 days ago. Except the chair at the table had been pushed back hard, one leg catching the edge of the rug, rucking it up, and Robert Voss was not in the house. He had taken something with him. The tear was deliberate, not panic, not struggle. Someone had removed a specific section of that map knowing exactly what they were taking. Lena looked at what remained. The survey grid, the route markings, Claire's field notes reproduced in Robert's handwriting along the margins. The missing section was the lower right corner. She oriented the remaining map in her mind. Lower right, eastern boundary, grid 9C. He'd taken the section that showed the boundary marker's original registered position against its relocated position. The evidence Claire had sent him. The data behind the discrepancy. Robert Voss had left this house carrying the one piece of the puzzle that corroborated everything without needing anything else. Her phone rang. "Noel, we found the satellite communicator," he said. 2.3 miles from the boundary marker, in a shallow clay hollow between two eroded formations, the kind of place a person might fall, or a device might land if thrown from the ridge above. The casing was cracked. The internal log showed a single attempted transmission at 1841, consistent with Claire's timeline, followed by a hardware error code. Malfunction, signal failure, clean, documented, explainable, too explainable. Lena looked at the bag through the phone camera Noel held up for her. "Who found it?" she asked. Anonymous tip. "Called into the BLM office this morning. Coordinates provided." Coordinates. Exact ones. To within 6 feet. Lena was quiet for 3 seconds. Who calls in exact coordinates for a device they happen to find in a remote clay hollow in the Badlands? Noel lowered the bag. "Someone who knew exactly where it was," he said. "Before it was there," Lena said. Two things were happening simultaneously. Someone was planting evidence, constructing a version of Claire's disappearance that ended with a malfunctioning device and a tragic accident in difficult terrain. And Robert Voss had walked out of this house carrying the one document that dismantled that version, and had not told her he was going. Lena looked at Claire's photograph. 28 years old. Sent to survey land her father had contested 5 years earlier. She had asked herself before whether that was coincidence. She had answered herself, no. But she had been thinking about it wrong. She had been asking whether Robert had sent Claire here, knowing what she'd find. The better question, the one that had been sitting quietly at the edge of everything, was whether Claire had known too. Whether this had been, from the very beginning, not a survey assignment, but a plan, completed by a daughter who loved her father enough to finish what he couldn't. Robert Voss was not a reckless man. He had spent 40 years measuring the world to tolerances of inches. He understood the value of precision, of patience. He had filed the competing claim in 2017 because he had known, not suspected, known what Dale Hurst was doing to that parcel. He had lost the filing. He had lost the appeal. He had watched the reclassification go through and understood that the channels he could reach had already been sealed from the inside. So he had waited. And when the federal survey contract had been assigned to his daughter's firm, a contract Claire had applied for herself, without his knowledge, for her own reasons. He had recognized it for what it was, not coincidence, not fate, geometry. The land always told the truth eventually. You just had to put the right instrument at the right coordinate. He looked up at the security camera, let it look back at him. Then he reached into his jacket and held up the torn map section directly in front of the lens. 41 feet, 3 inches, documented, photographed, emailed, backed up. He was not here to confront Dale Hurst. He was here to make sure Dale Hurst knew that the geometry was already public. He watched Robert Voss hold the map section up to the camera for 11 seconds. Then lower it, turn around, walk back to his truck, drive away. Dale did not move for a long time. He had miscalculated Robert Voss the same way he had miscalculated Claire. He had read the father as grief, as a man collapsed inward, building his corkboard shrine because action was unavailable to him. But grief, Dale understood now, was not the absence of action. It was action with a longer fuse. Robert Voss had not come here to make a scene. He had come here to deliver a message with the precision of a man who had spent his life making the land legible. The message was simple. Everything you buried here has already been measured. Dale set the tablet face down on the desk, sat in the lamplight. For the first time in 10 days, he did not immediately reach for his phone. He sat, and in the silence of that sitting, something that had been the architecture of certainty began very quietly to shift. She found Robert Voss's tire tracks still fresh in the clay. He'd been here 10 minutes ago, maybe 15. She looked up at the camera. Whoever was watching on the other end had now seen 2 people arrive at this gate, within 20 minutes of each other, neither of them announcing themselves, both of them knowing the camera was there, both of them letting it look. Lena held up her badge toward the lens, held it for 5 seconds. "Detective Cross," she said clearly, to no one, to the camera, to whatever was on the other side of the gate. "I'm coming back tomorrow with a warrant for the access road, the property perimeter, and every surveying record connected to grid section 9C, going back to 2015. She lowered the badge. "Tonight, Mr. Hurst," she paused. "Find your daughter." She walked back to her vehicle, got in, drove. Behind her, the camera's red light stayed steady, watching the empty road long after she was gone. Day 11. 3 warrants. The first, Dale Hurst's property, access road, perimeter, outbuildings, all survey records connected to Grid 9C, all communications relating to the 2019 reclassification application. The second, Sandra Yee's law office, the notarized documents, the correspondence files, any record of communication with BLM, regional administrative staff. The third, the one that had kept her at this desk until 3 a.m., Robert Voss, his residence, his firm's records, his communications with Claire in the 6 months preceding her survey assignment. She had not wanted to write that one. She had written it anyway, because wanting and knowing were 2 separate instruments, and she had always trusted the second over the first. The camera had been disabled at 4 a.m., not cut, properly powered down from inside the property by someone who knew the system. The gate lock had been changed sometime in the night. The new chain was heavier. County bolt cutters took 4 minutes. Noel had said nothing about either fact until they were through the gate. Then, he knew we were coming. "I told him we were coming," Lena said. Noel looked at her. "I wanted him to know. A man who plans responds to advance. Notice differently than a man who reacts. How he responded tells us which one we're dealing with." She looked at the powered-down camera. "He didn't run. He didn't lawyer up overnight. He disabled the feed and changed the lock." She started up the road. "He's still here, and he's decided something." He was waiting for her. No attorney, no prepared statement, just Dale Hurst at the top of his own road with his gloves off in the cold morning air. Lena stopped 6 feet from him. He looked older in daylight than the desk lamp had allowed, or perhaps just, finally, his actual age. "Detective Cross," he said. "Mr. Hurst." A beat. The wind moving between them, carrying nothing useful. "I expected you yesterday," he said. "I had paperwork." He nodded slowly, as if that were reasonable, as if they were colleagues discussing scheduling. "There are things," he said, "that I am prepared to discuss, and things that will require my attorney present. Sandra Yee is currently being served her own warrant," Lena said. "She may be occupied." Something moved behind his pale eyes. Not panic. Something older than panic. "Then I'll need someone else," he said. The satellite communicator had been opened before. Dr. Wynn indicated the interior housing, 4 screw points, each showing micro-abrasion consistent with a precision tool. The error code logged in the device memory corresponded to a hardware fault in the signal relay board. "This relay," Dr. Wynn said, "doesn't fail from impact. The casing crack is external, consistent with a drop or throw, but the relay fault is internal, pre-existing, meaning the device was already non-functional when it was cracked, meaning the crack was cosmetic, applied after the functional fault, to make the fault look accidental." Lena straightened. "Can you establish when the relay was disabled?" Dr. Wynn set down her tool. "The device log shows a manual access of the internal housing 48 hours before the logged transmission attempt. 48 hours before Claire raised it at the boundary marker and chose not to trigger it. The communicator had already been tampered with before Claire ever picked it up that morning. The communicator had been in the equipment case at base camp, accessed 48 hours before Claire's last day in the field, 48 hours before. Garrett Chu had been at base camp 48 hours before. The full survey team had been at base camp, and someone else had been at base camp. Not on day 1, after Claire disappeared. Before. Dale Hurst, or someone working for him, had been inside that equipment case 2 days before Claire walked out to Grid 9C, before she found the marker, before she emailed the discrepancy, before the private server reply told her to stop looking. They had not been reacting to Claire. They had been prepared for her. Lena put her glasses back on. "I need the tool abrasion photographed, documented, and submitted to the federal evidence chain by end of day," she said. She picked up her phone, walked toward the lab door, dialed Noel. "How far are we into Hearst's property?" "Outbuildings clear. Moving to the main structure. There's a room somewhere," she said. "A records room. Filed paper, not digital. A man who plans like this keeps a physical record of everything he considers leverage." "How do you know it's paper?" "Because he's 61 years old and he trusts the land. Paper doesn't have a server address someone can subpoena." A beat. "Find it," she said. Warren Hale had called her. Not through counsel, not through the BLM legal office. Direct line, his own cell. He'd asked to meet somewhere that wasn't federal property. That, Lena knew, was the sound of a man deciding which side of something he wanted to be standing on when the weight came down. She sat down beside him on the bench. "The pencil circle," she said. "On the map wall. Grid 9C. How long has it been there?" Hale looked at his hands. 7 years, he said. Lena waited. "I flagged it internally in 2018. The subsurface mineral assessment. The survey, contract, conflict of interest. All of it. I wrote a full internal memo." "What happened to it?" He unwound the glasses cord from his fingers, wound it back. "Director Albrecht called me into his office. Told me the review had been completed. At a level above my pay grade. Told me the memo would not be entered into the record. And you accepted that. It wasn't a question. He answered it anyway. "I have a daughter," he said, "in college, and a mortgage. And I told myself the memo not being entered was different from the memo not existing." Silence. "I kept a copy," he said, "off-site, personal storage, for 7 years. He reached into his jacket, produced a folded envelope, held it out. "I've been waiting," he said, "for someone to ask the right question." The memo was 14 pages, single-spaced, footnoted, written with the precision of a man who understood he might need it to be unimpeachable someday. It documented everything. The conflict of interest in the survey contract, the reclassification pathway and its anomalies, Director Albrecht's intervention, 3 separate instances of boundary data being altered in the regional registry, all in parcels connected to Hearst Land Development subsidiaries. And on page 11, a name Lena had not seen before. A state geological survey report from 2016, internal, never published, that had identified significant rare earth mineral deposits in the subsurface of the reclassified zone. Grid 9C. Lena stopped reading, looked up at the corridor ceiling. This was never about land. It was never about a boundary marker, or an acquisition application, or a competing claim. It was about what was underneath. Rare earth minerals. The kind of deposit that transformed a parcel from a land deal into a national resource extraction contract worth somewhere between $50 and $200 million. Claire Voss had not found a fraud. She had found the reason for everything. He had asked for water 40 minutes ago. No one had brought it. He understood this was deliberate. Small calibrations of comfort and discomfort were the procedural vocabulary of people who needed you to feel the room before they entered it. He was familiar with the vocabulary. He sat with his hands in his lap, looked at his own fingers, bare. For the first time in years, he was aware of them as just hands, not instruments, not tools, not the part of himself that left no prints, just hands. He thought about Robert Voss holding the map section up to the camera. He thought about Claire lowering the communicator when she saw the vehicle on the ridge. He thought about a girl who had her father's precision and her own nerve and had walked into the Badlands to finish a measurement that had been interrupted 5 years before she arrived. The door handle moved. Dale Hearst straightened, put his hands flat on his knees, and waited for whatever was about to be measured. She let the silence run for 90 seconds. She had counted. 90 seconds was the point at which most people either filled the space or committed to not filling it. Dale Hearst committed. He sat with his bare hands on his knees and let the 90 seconds pass without a single adjustment of posture. That told her something. She turned the memo face up, slid it across the table, stopped it in front of him. He looked down, read the header, looked back up. "Page 11, she said. He turned to it. "Read it." Turned back to the first page, a man checking whether the document was complete, not whether it was accurate. He already knew it was accurate. He was checking how much of it they had. Rare earth deposits, Lena said. Subsurface. Grid 9C and the surrounding 400 acres. The 2016 geological report that never made it to publication. Dale said nothing. The reclassification wasn't about land value. It was about extraction rights. Federal land can't be privately mined. Commercially designated zones can, under the right licensing structure. Still nothing. You've been building toward a mineral extraction contract for 9 years. The boundary marker was the last piece. Moving it absorbed a section of terrain that would have triggered an environmental review, blocking the extraction license. Dale closed the memo, aligned it with the table edge. The gesture of a man returning a document to its proper place. "You're thorough," he said. His voice was the same. Even, measured. The voice he'd used on every phone call, in every office, across every document for 31 years. "Where is she?" Lena said. The voice was the same. But something behind his eyes was not. The records room was behind a panel in the utility corridor. Noel had found it because the utility corridor was 4 feet shorter on the inside than the outside. 18 years of files. Every land deal, every subsidiary, every application, rejection, resubmission, approval, cross-referenced, tabbed. The work of a man who trusted paper because paper, unlike digital records, required physical presence to destroy. In the steel drawer, 2 folders, unlabeled. The first contained correspondence between Hearst and Director Albrecht, going back to 2015. Payments, not through the company's personal accounts. Wire transfers routed through a title company Noel had never heard of. The second folder made him put the first one down. It contained a single document. A geological survey subcontract, issued by Hearst Land Development, dated 3 weeks before Claire Voss's survey assignment. The subcontractor named Voss Cartographic Services, LLC. Robert Voss Noel picked up his phone. Robert Voss had been under contract to Hearst Land Development 3 weeks before Claire's assignment. A cartographic subcontract, terrain verification for the reclassified zone boundary. Paid, signed, completed. Lena stood very still. She thought about the corkboard, the organized grief, the competing claim in 2017, the lost appeal. She thought about a man who spent 5 years watching Dale Hearst absorb the land he tried to protect, and then, instead of continuing to fight, took the contract. She thought about Claire not knowing. She thought about Claire measuring 41 feet, 3 inches, with her father's instruments, her father's training, her father's precision. On land, her father had been paid to verify for the man who stole it. She lowered the phone, looked at Dale Hearst. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has just watched someone arrive at the same place he arrived a very long time ago. He knew, Lena said, not to Dale, to herself. Yes, Dale said anyway. He took the contract, Dale said, because he had no other leverage. The appeals were exhausted. The competing claim was dead. He couldn't stop what was happening. So he inserted himself into it, to document it from the inside, Lena said, to give his daughter something to find. The room was very quiet. He seeded the discrepancy, Lena said slowly. The boundary marker. He moved it. Dale looked at her steadily. I moved it, he said, in 2018 to absorb the terrain section into the commercial zone. And Robert Voss, as part of his cartographic subcontract, documented the original position before the move. He was meticulous, Dale said, something in his voice that wasn't quite admiration but was in the same territory. He documented where it should have been, left it in the survey record, knowing that when the next contractor came to verify the boundary, they would find the discrepancy, Lena said. He planned for his daughter, Dale said quietly. I planned for the land. He planned for Claire. The silence after that had a different quality than all the silences before it. Robert Voss had signed the subcontract, completed the verification work, submitted the terrain data to Hearst, and embedded within that data, in the survey notation system that only another cartographer would read, was a record of the original boundary position. Not hidden. Not encrypted, just written in the language of a profession that assumed its readers knew how to measure things. Claire had known. She had been trained by her father. She spoke the same language. When she crouched at the marker and found 41 feet 3 inches, she hadn't just found a discrepancy. She had found her father's handwriting in the landscape. She had understood immediately, not just what Hearst had done, but what her father had left for her. Lena set the subcontract down. "He didn't send her here," she said quietly. "He couldn't have known she'd get this assignment. But he prepared for the possibility," Noelle said. "For years. That someone would come. That she might be the one." Lena looked at the shelves. 18 years of Dale Hearst's meticulous documentation of his own careful crimes. And inside it, like a note passed in a language only 2 people shared, a father's instructions to his daughter for when she arrived. "Where is she, Noelle?" He looked at the wall of files. "I don't know. He does," she said. "And I think he's decided to tell us." He had protected the land for 31 years. Not out of sentiment, not out of love for the terrain, though that had been there too, somewhere under the calculation. Out of understanding. The land had value that other people had not yet learned to measure. And people who couldn't measure something had no business controlling it. That had always been his logic. It had been sufficient for a long time. But Robert Voss could measure things. Claire Voss could measure things. And what they had measured, what the father had left encoded in the survey notation, what the daughter had found crouching in the clay with her father's instruments, was not just a boundary discrepancy. It was a proof that the land had always been telling the truth, and that the only people who had ever been lying were the ones trying to redraw it. Dale Hearst looked at his hands, flat on his knees. No gloves. He thought about Claire lowering the communicator, not triggering it, moving into the formations. She had been protecting the evidence. She had trusted the land to hold it until someone came. He looked at the window. In the main station, Lena Cross was picking up her jacket, moving toward the door. Dale Hearst straightened. "Detective," he said, loud enough to carry through the glass. She stopped, turned. He held her gaze through the window for a long moment. Then he said, "She's in the land. She put herself there. She knew it would hold." Lena went very still. "Eastern Formation, Grid 9D, the hollow at the base of the second spire from the marker. She's sheltered, not buried. She went there herself." He looked back at his hands. "She measured it first," he said quietly. "Of course she did. She's Robert Voss's daughter." She ran. 11 days. The land had been holding her for 11 days. The hollow was exactly where Dale Hearst said it was. The second spire from the marker. The one that faced east, catching the morning light first, holding warmth longest against its sheltered base. Claire Voss had measured it, had known it would hold heat through the night, had walked there deliberately, had survived there with the precision of someone who understood terrain the way other people understood rooms. Lena reached the hollow, crouched, in the shadow at the spire's base, curled against the warm clay, field vest intact, GPS still in hand. Claire Voss looked up, dehydrated, exhausted. 11 days of Badlands cold and heat written across her face, but her eyes were clear, and in her other hand, pressed flat against the clay wall, was the torn section of survey map, her father's notation in the margins. She had been holding it the entire time. Claire had been dehydrated, malnourished, mild hypothermia. The doctors used words like remarkable and resourceful. What they meant was, she had known exactly what she was doing when she walked into those formations. She had rationed the water from a seep crack in the spire base. Her father had noted it in the survey notation. Natural water source, reliable, marked in the margin with a small circle and the word hold. Hold. Lena looked at the map section on the bedside table. "He left you instructions," she said. Claire looked at the ceiling, the particular look of someone deciding how much of something they are ready to say out loud. "He left me a survey," she said finally. "It's the same thing. In our family." "He didn't tell me," Claire said, "about the subcontract, about what he'd embedded in the data." She turned the map section over. The back was covered in her own handwriting, notes made during the 11 days, dates, temperatures, water intake, measured, documented. Her father's daughter, even in a clay hollow in the dark. "He applied for the survey contract on my behalf, submitted my firm's credentials. I thought I'd gotten it on merit." She looked up. "Maybe I did. Maybe both things are true." Lena said nothing. "I found the discrepancy on my own," Claire said. "I didn't know it was his notation until I was already in the hollow. until I had time to read everything. All the margins. Her jaw tightened. He measured the water source, the heat retention of the spire face, the shelter geometry of the hollow. He measured all of it and left it in a document that only I would know how to read. She set the map down. He built me a room, she said quietly, in the middle of nowhere, out of numbers, in case I needed it. She had found him in the corridor 20 minutes before his scheduled interview with the federal prosecutor. He had known she was coming. That was visible in the way he didn't look up when she arrived, only moved his hands from his knees to his lap and waited. "The subcontract," Lena said. "Yes. You want to tell me what you were thinking?" He looked up then. His eyes behind the reading glasses were the eyes of a man who had been thinking about this conversation for 3 years. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "that the only way left to document what he was doing was from inside what he was doing. You took his money. I took his contract. I did the work. I embedded the truth in the work. And I waited. For Claire." A long pause. "I didn't plan for Claire specifically. I planned for whoever came next. It happened to be Claire." His voice broke on the last word, just slightly. 1 degree. Then it was steady again. "Does that make it better or worse?" Lena said. "That it was her." He looked at his hands. "I don't know yet," he said. "I expect I'll be figuring that out for the rest of my life." "She said you built her a room," Lena said. "In the margins." Robert was quiet for a moment. "She said that. Her words." He removed his reading glasses, held them in both hands. "Her mother used to say when Claire was small that I talked to her in maps, that instead of bedtime stories, I described terrain. Drainage patterns, elevation changes, the way water moves through land." He turned the glasses over in his hands. "Claire used to fall asleep to the sound of me explaining how a valley forms, how a river decides its own course." Lena said nothing. "I suppose," he said, "that when I embedded those notations, when I marked the water source and the shelter geometry, I wasn't thinking about a missing persons scenario." He put the glasses back on. "I was thinking in the language we've always spoken. I was just talking to her, the way I always have." Down the corridor, a door opened, and Aide appeared, looked at Robert, nodded. "Time." Robert stood, straightened his flannel shirt, picked up the folded map he'd been carrying since the house. "Detective Cross." She looked up. "Thank you," he said, "for asking the right questions." He walked toward the door. Lena watched him go, thought about questions and the years it sometimes takes for the right ones to find the right room. Warren Hale spoke for 40 minutes. Marsh let him. The memo. The suppressed internal review. Director Albrecht's intervention. The wire transfers routed through the title company. 3 additional parcels, not in the current warrant, where the same reclassification pathway had been used to absorb federally protected terrain into commercially designated zones. Not just Grid 9C. 9 years of it. Marsh's pen moved steadily. He asked 3 questions, all of them procedural, none of them emotional. When Hale finished, Marsh capped his pen. "You understand," Marsh said, "that cooperation at this level changes your exposure significantly." "I understand," Hale said. "You also understand that it doesn't eliminate it." "I understand that too." Marsh looked at him for a moment. "You kept the memo for 7 years." "Yes." "In personal storage." "Yes." "Why?" Hale looked at the floor, then back up. "Because not entering it into the record was the decision they made. Keeping it was the only decision I got to make." Marsh looked at him for one more moment, then opened the next page of his legal pad. "Let's go back to the title company," he said. Sandra had cooperated, partially. The notarized documents, the reclassification paperwork, her role in the access road transfer. She had drawn a clear line at the satellite communicator. "I advised on documents," she had told Marsh. "I was not advised of any operational elements." Operational elements. The language of a woman who had spent 31 years knowing exactly how much to know. Now she stood in the corridor and looked at Lena Cross with the expression she'd worn in the diner, the professional mask, the calculation underneath. "She's alive," Lena said. Something moved behind Sandra's eyes. Not relief exactly, something more complicated. The face of a person absorbing a fact that simultaneously reduces and increases what they are responsible for. "I'm glad," Sandra said. Her voice was the same, still the same. "Are you?" Lena said. Sandra held her gaze for a long moment. "I made choices," she said carefully. "Inside a structure I didn't build. Most people do," Lena said. doesn't change what the choices were. Sandra's attorney touched her arm again. This time, she moved, walked to the door, pushed through it. The door closed behind her with the sound of a building designed to process rather than resolve. Dale Hurst had been charged. Federal fraud, land manipulation, conspiracy to obstruct a federal survey, tampering with evidence. The satellite communicator charge was the cleanest. Dr. Wynn's forensic report left no interpretive space. Sandra Yee, 2 counts. Albrecht, in Florida, briefly surprised, 3 counts via federal reach. The title company, frozen pending audit. Robert Voss, 1 count. Obstruction for removing the map section from the residence before she could formally collect it as evidence. His attorney was already negotiating. His cooperation was already substantial. His daughter was already recovering. Lena stood in the empty corridor. She thought about the 3 warrants. How the third one, Robert Voss's, had been the hardest to write. How writing it had been right. How right and hard were not mutually exclusive. She thought about Claire in the hollow. Her father's notations pressed against the clay. She thought about her own daughter, the closed door at the end of the hallway, the note she hadn't left, the conversation she kept arriving home too late to have. She looked at the empty bench, picked up her phone, dialed. It rang twice. "Mom?" Lena closed her eyes. "Hey," she said, "I'm done. I'm coming home." He had asked the deputy for 5 minutes. The deputy had given him 3. Dale stood in the light of the work lamp and looked at what he had built. 18 years. Every document, every subsidiary, every carefully constructed pathway between an idea and its execution. He had believed, for a long time, that this room was proof of something. Intelligence, patience, vision, the ability to see what land was worth before anyone else learned to measure it. He looked at the empty table. Robert Voss had measured it. Claire Voss had measured it. A BLM coordinator had measured it 7 years ago and put the measurement in personal storage because that was the only decision left to him. Even the land itself, the seep crack in the spire base, the heat retention of the eastern face, the shelter geometry of the hollow had been measured, turned into a room. For a girl who needed it. Dale looked at his bare hands in the lamplight. He had spent 31 years leaving no prints. He had left prints everywhere. They were just written in a language he hadn't learned to read. The deputy cleared his throat. Dale turned, walked out of the room. The work lamp stayed on behind him, illuminating an empty table, a circle of light, and 18 years of shelving disappearing into the dark, above and on all sides. The land does not mark time the way people do. It doesn't distinguish between the day a boundary marker was moved and the day a girl crouched beside it and found it wrong. Between the day a subcontract was signed and the day the notations in its margins became a room in a hollow that held a life for 11 days. Between the day a man started building his records room and the day he stood in it with bare hands and finally understood what he had documented. The Badlands hold everything. They held the marker. They held the hollow. They held the water and the seep crack. They held Claire Voss for 11 days without asking anything of her, except that she knew how to measure. The survey flag moves in the first wind. The land is not finished. It is never finished. It just continues. Patient, indifferent, precise, waiting for the next person who knows how to read it. She had called him from the hospital 3 days after they found her, when she could hold the phone without her hands shaking. He had answered on the first ring, same as always. She hadn't said much. He hadn't either. There was a grammar between them that didn't require sentences. The same grammar that lived in survey notations and margin marks and the precise measurement of a hollow in the eastern formation that would hold heat through the night. Now she walked up the gravel and he stood on the porch. And the distance between them was the last distance in a story that had been made entirely of distances. Measured, documented, and finally closed. He came down the porch steps, met her halfway. "You should have told me," she said. Not angry, not yet. Later there would be time for the shape of what he had done, the subcontract, the embedded notations, the plan that wasn't a plan for her but became one anyway. Later. "I know," he said. "The hollow," she said. "The water source. The heat retention data, you measured all of it. Years ago, when I did the terrain verification, you measured it for me." He looked at her. "I measured it because it was there to be measured," he said. "And then I left it, in case." She looked at him for a long moment. "In our family," she said, "that's the same thing." He pulled her in. She let him. Behind them, the work truck sat in the driveway, the dust on the hood already beginning to be disturbed by the morning wind. Something resuming. She had come home at 9. Her daughter had been awake. They had sat at this table until past midnight, not talking about the case, not talking about the accident, not talking about the 11 months of closed doors and missed hours. Just talking. The way people talk when they have finally decided that the distance between them is a measurement they made and can therefore unmake. Lena looked at the photograph. She thought about Robert Voss saying I was just talking to her the way I always have, and understood something about the languages people build between themselves when words feel insufficient. Her daughter's door was open. She had been the one to open it. Coming out at 9:15 when she heard Lena's key, Lena wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. The case files were in her bag in the hallway. They would be there tomorrow. This morning the table was clear. The door was open. The coffee was hot. She sat with it. Marsh walked the way he thought. Steadily. No wasted movement. Always slightly ahead of the conversation. Hearst's attorney filed for a reduced cooperation agreement this morning. Quote, he said, "I heard. He wants the extraction contract charges separated from the obstruction. Claims the mineral deposit assessment was conducted in good faith. The communicator was tampered with 48 hours before Claire Voss picked it up," Lena said. "Nothing about this was conducted in good faith," Marsh made a note. "Robert Voss's cooperation has been substantial. His count will likely be reduced to a civil finding. No custodial sentence." Lena said nothing. "You disagree." "I think he made his choices the same way everyone else did," she said. "Inside a structure he didn't build, but chose to work inside of." Sandra Yee said something similar. Sandra Yee had a briefcase and a billing rate. Robert Voss had a daughter. Marsh stopped walking, looked at her. "Those aren't the same," she said. "I'm not saying they are. I'm saying the law may not have a box for the difference, but people do." Marsh looked at his legal pad, made another note, started walking again. "The extraction license application," he said, "has been formally withdrawn pending the federal fraud determination. The reclassification is being reversed. Grid 9C returns to protected status." Lena looked ahead down the corridor. "The land," she said, "was always protected. It just needed someone to document it." He had declined the cooperation agreement. His attorney had advised against declining, had used words like exposure and sentencing range and prosecutorial latitude. Dale had listened, thanked him, declined anyway. He was 61 years old. He had spent 31 years constructing something with precision and patience, and the deep belief that what he was doing was a form of understanding that others simply hadn't developed yet. He was not going to spend the remaining proceedings pretending otherwise in exchange for a reduced count. He had built what he had built. He would answer for it. As its architect, not as a peripheral figure negotiating toward the edges of his own design. That, at least, was something he could still choose. He walked at his own pace, thought about Claire Voss in the hollow, thought about the seep crack in the spire base, the water her father had marked that the land had been holding since long before either of them arrived. He thought about how the land had been right the entire time, and how he had known that, had always known that, had simply believed it was a truth that could be managed. He had been wrong. The side door opened ahead. He walked through it without slowing. She had asked to come back, before the federal evidence team completed their survey, before the reclassification reversal was formally processed. She had asked to stand here, at the correct coordinate, where the marker should have been. The GPS confirmed it, down to the inch. The way her father had taught her, you don't approximate what you can measure. She looked at the ground at her feet. The clay was undisturbed here, no post hole, no anchor point. The land at the correct coordinate had never been touched. Everything that had happened, the manipulation, the fraud, the 9 years of careful construction, the 11 days in the hollow, had happened because someone had moved a post 41 feet, 3 inches from this spot. She crouched, pressed her hand flat against the undisturbed clay. The ground was cold, solid, unyielding, exactly what it had always been. She opened her field notebook, wrote the coordinate, the date, the temperature, the condition of the ground surface. Then, in the margin, in the notation style her father had taught her before she could read a sentence, she wrote, hold, stood, looked at the formations around her. The land received the word the way it received everything, without comment, without acknowledgement, without the need for either. It simply continued. She had driven out here, not for the case. The case was with Marsh now, with the federal evidence chain, with the courts and the counts and the years of processing that followed the moment of event. She had driven out here because she had been asking questions about this terrain for 11 days and had not yet simply stood in it. The formations were not beautiful the way landscapes are described as beautiful, which is to say, they offered nothing to the viewer as a comfort. They were simply present, enormous, eroded, patient, older than every decision that had ever been made in their proximity. Lena stood at the edge. She thought about Claire writing hold in the margin. She thought about her daughter opening the door at 9:15. She thought about the note she had not left. In all the months of closed doors, and the fact that the first word she had said when the phone was answered was simply, hey, hey, not a document, not a notation, not a plan. Just a voice in a corridor saying, I am here, I am coming, I have been here all along. The wind moved across the clay. The survey flag at Grid 9C was just visible in the distance, orange, faded, moving. Lena stood at the edge of the road and the terrain, did not step forward, did not step back, just stood there in the flat, cold light, at the boundary. A woman who found missing things for a living finally, briefly, not looking for anything. The Badlands don't bury things. They hold them, every measurement ever taken here, every marker ever placed or displaced, every notation in every margin of every document carried into this terrain by anyone who understood that the land was not background. It was record. The survey flag moves. The hollow is empty. The clay at the correct coordinate holds the cold impression of a hand pressed flat against it, and in a field notebook, carried out of the formations by a woman who survived them. One word in the margin, hold. The Badlands receive it, the way they receive everything, without comment, without the need for either. The flag moves, the land continues. The sky at its edge is beginning to clear.